All right. I told y'all it's gonna take 2 hours for me to get to the library, but it took me under 1 hour and 45 minutes to get to the library. So let me go get these books and read the titles to you guys. Also, I have the British version of the books, which is very hard to find in America. But by me being a actual library patron, somebody who actually frequents the library every day, all day, I actually got my wish. I got the British versions of the books. And the British version of the book is not like the American book. It's like one of those story books instead of like the big books that's this thick. It's flat like this. Let me go get them. All right. And as y'all can see, I actually walked. I'm a little bit sweaty. But here goes book number one. This is J.K. Rowling, Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, the British version. Hold up, wait, hot sauce. Hold up, wait. Here goes the other British one. This is J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. This is the other British book. Here goes the other British book, which is J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. I like the British books due to the fact that they are shaped like a storybook. They're shaped like a storybook. I love it just for that. And let me go get the other three books. Well, I'm sorry, the other four books. Okay, I have Harry Potter, another one, The Prisoner of Azkaban, the American version. I have I have Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix. I have Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. I think I got some of these books twice. I think I got the British and the English version twice. And I have Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. The books, Ciance, the books are better than the movie. The books are better than the movie. All right. if I'm not mistaken, I want to say the Sorcerer's Stone is the first book. So you guys, y'all excuse me, I will be jumping around because my local library didn't have all the British books and they also didn't have all the American books. So I grabbed what I can see. And some of those authors that y'all was telling me about my last video, I also gave that to my librarians and they said they're gonna look for them for me. Ooh. All right. See, hot sauce. Let's start reading now. Let me finish this cigarette. And to do it old-fashioned, put my legs on the ground Indian style, since I ain't got no furniture, let me sit on the floor. No, see, I say since people say I ain't got no furniture, let me sit on the floor. But hot sauce, don't be prepared. Just listen. Just listen. Okay, you guys, y'all just listen. Let me start all over from page 1, chapter 1. There's no need for y'all to get prepared. The first book, Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone by J.K. Rowling. Harry has never known, Harry Potter has never been the star of a Quidditch team, scoring points while riding a broom far above the ground. He knows no spells, has never helped hatch a dragon, and has never worn a cloak of invisibility. All he knows is a miserable life with the Dursleys, his horrible aunt and uncle, and their abominable son, Dudley. A great big swollen spoiled bully, Harry's room is in a tiny closet at the front of the stairs, and he hasn't had a birthday party in 11 years. But all that is about to change when, hold up you guys, let me turn on some light. I can't see. But all this is about to change when a mysterious letter arrives by owl. A letter with an invitation to an incredible place that Harry and anyone who reads about him will find unforgettable. For it's there that he finds not only friends, aerial sports, and magic in everything from classes to meals, but a great destiny that's been waiting for him if Harry can survive the encounter. Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, and I read the preface. For Jessica, who loves stories, for Anne, who loved them too, and for Dee, who heard this one first. The Boy Who Lived, Chapter 1. Mr. and Mrs. Dursley of number 4 Privet Drive were proud to say that they were perfectly normal. Thank you very much. They were the last people you'd expect to be involved in anything strange or mysterious, because they just didn't hold with such nonsense. Mr. Dursley was the director of a firm called Grunnings, which made drills. He was a big, beefy man who handled any neck, although he did have a very large mustache. Mrs. Dursley was thin and blonde and had nearly twice the usual amount of neck, which came in very useful as she spent so much of her time craning over garden fences, spying on neighbors. The Dursleys had a small son called Dudley. Dudley, in their opinion, was no finer boy anywhere. The Dursleys had everything they wanted, but they also had a secret. And their greatest fear was that somebody would discover it. They didn't think that they could bear it, or if anyone found out about the Potters, Miss Potter and Miss Dursley's sister. But they hadn't met for several years. In fact, Miss Dursley pretended she didn't have a sister because her sister and her good-for-nothing husband were as un-Dursley-ish as was possible to be. The Dursleys shuddered to think that what the neighbors would say if the Potters arrived in the street. Okay, where did I live out? In the street, where is it? Okay, the Dursleys knew the Potters had a small son, but they had never seen him. The boy was another good reason for keeping the Potters away. They didn't want Dudley mixing with a child like that. When Mr. and Mrs. Dursley woke up on a dull gray Tuesday, our story starts. There was nothing about the cloudy sky outside suggests that strange and mysterious things would soon happen all over the country. Mr. Dursley hummed as he picked out his most boring tie for work, and Miss Dursley gossiped away happily as she wrestled a screaming Dudley into his high chair. None of them noticed a large tawny owl flutter past the window. At 8:30, Mr. Dursley picked up his briefcase, pecked Mrs. Dursley on the cheek, and tried to kiss Dudley goodbye, but missed. Dudley was now having a tantrum and throwing his cereal at the walls. "Little Tyke," chortled Mr. Dudley as he left the house. He got into his car and backed out of his number 4's drive. It was on the corner of the street that he noticed the first sign of something peculiar: a cat reading a map. For a second, Mr. Dursley didn't realize what he had seen. Then he jerked his head around to look again. There was a tabby cat standing on the corner of Privet Drive, but there wasn't a map in sight. What could he have been thinking? It must have been a trick of the light. Mr. Dursley blinked and stared at the cat. It stared back, and Miss Dursley drove around the corner, up the road. He watched the cat in his mirror. It was now reading the sign that said Privet Drive. No. Looking at the sign, cats don't read maps or signs. Mr. Dursley gave himself a little shake and put the cat out of his mind. As he drove toward town, he thought of nothing except a large order of drills he was hoping to get done by the end of the day. But on the edge of town, drills were driven out of his mind by something else. As he sat in the usual morning traffic jam, he couldn't help but notice. Oh, excuse me, I just burped. There seemed to be a lot of strangely dressed people about. People in cloaks. Mr. Dursley couldn't bear people who dressed in funny clothes. The get ups you saw on young people. He supposed this was some stupid new fashion. He drummed his fingers on the steering wheel, and his eyes fell on the huddle of these weirdos stranding close by. They were whispering excitedly together. Mr. Dursley was enraged to see that a couple of them weren't young at all. Why? The man had to be older than he was and wearing an emerald green cloak. The nerve of him! But then it struck him, Mr. Dursley, that this was probably some silly stunt. These people were obviously collecting for something. Yes. That would be it. The traffic moved on, and a few minutes later, Mr. Dursley arrived in the Grunnings parking lot, his mind back on drills. Mr. Dursley always sat with his back to the window in his office on the ninth floor. If he hadn't, he might have found it harder to concentrate on drills that morning. He didn't see the owls swooping past in broad daylight. Though people down the street did, they pointed and gazed, open mouthed, as owls sped overhead. Most of them had never seen an owl, even at nighttime. Mr. Dursley, however, had a perfectly normal, owl free morning. He yelled at five different people. He made several important telephone calls and shouted a bit more. He was in a very good mood until lunchtime, when he thought he'd stretch his legs and walk across the road to buy himself a bun from the bakery. He'd forgotten all about the people in cloaks until he passed a group of them next to the baker's. He eyed them angrily. He didn't know why, but they made him uneasy. This bunch was whispering excitedly, too, and he couldn't see a single collecting tin. It was on his way back past him, clutching a donut in a bag, that he caught a few words of what they were saying. The Potters. That's right. That's what I heard. Yes, their son. Harry. Harry. Miss Dursley stopped dead. Fear flooded him. He looked back at the whispers as if he wanted to say something to them, but thought he better not. He dashed back across the road, hurried up to his office, snapped at his secretary not to disturb him, seized his telephone, and had almost finished dialing his home number when he changed his mind. He put the receiver back down, stroked his mustache, thinking. No, he was being stupid. Potter wasn't such an unusual name. He was sure there were lots of people called Potter who had a son called Harry. Come to think of it, he wasn't even sure if his nephew was called Harry. He'd never even seen the boy. It might have been Harvey or Harold. There was no point in worrying about Mrs. Dursley. She was always she always got so upset at any mention of her sister. He didn't blame her. But all the same, those people in cloaks. He found it a lot harder to concentrate on drills that afternoon. And when he left the building at 5 o'clock, he was still so worried that he walked straight into someone just outside the door. Sorry, he grunted, as the tiny old man stumbled and almost fell. It was a few seconds before Mr. Dudley realized that the man was wearing a violet cloak. He didn't seem at all upset at being almost knocked to the ground. On the contrary, his face split into a wide smile, and he said in a squeaky voice that made passerbyers stare, "Don't worry, don't worry, my dear sir, for nothing could upset me today. Rejoice, for you know who has gone at last. Even muggles like you yourself should be happy. The happy, happy day." And the old man, Mr. Dursley, the middle, and walked off. Mr. Dursley stood rooted at the spot. He had been hugged by a complete stranger. He also thought he had been called a muggle, whatever that was. He was rattled. He hurried to his car and set off for home, hoping he was imagining things which he had never hoped before, because he didn't approve of imagination. As he pulled into the driveway of number 4, the first thing he saw, and it didn't improve his mood, was the tabby cat he'd spotted that morning. It was now sitting on his garden wall. He was sure it was the same one. It had the same markings around his eyes. "Shoot, shoot," said Mr. Dursley loudly. The cat didn't move. It just gave him a stern look, which was normal cat behavior. Mr. Dursley wondered, trying to pull himself together. He let himself into the house. He was still determined not to mention anything to his wife. Mrs. Dursley, who had a nice normal day, she stood over dinner all about Mrs. Next Door's problems with her daughter and how Dudley had learned a new word. Won't. Won't, mama. Won't, mama. Won't. Mr. Dursley tried to act normally. When Dudley, who had been put to bed, he went into the living room in time to catch the last report of the evening news. And finally, bird watchers everywhere have reported the nation's owls have been behaving very unusually today. Although owls normally hunt at night, they are hardly ever seen in the daylight. There have been hundreds of sightings of these birds flying in every direction since sunrise. Experts are unable to explain why these owls have suddenly changed their sleeping patterns. The newscaster himself did a grin. Most mysterious. And now, over to Jim McGruffin with the weather. Going to buy any more showers of owls tonight, Jim? "Well, Ted," said the weatherman, "I don't know about that, but it's not only the owls that have been acting oddly today. Viewers as far as far as Kent, Yorkshire, and Dundee have been phoning in to tell me that instead of the rain I promised yesterday, they've had a downpour of shooting stars. Perhaps people have been celebrating bonfire night early." "It's not until next week, folks, but I can't promise a wet night tonight." Mr. Dursley sat frozen in his afternoon chair. Shooting stars all over the Britain, owls flying by daylight, mysterious people in cloaks all over the place. Hmm. And a whisper about the Potters. Mrs. Dursley came into the living room carrying 2 cups of tea. It was no good. He'd have to say something to her. He cleared his throat nervously. "Petunia, darling, dear, you haven't heard from your sister lately, haven't you? As he'd expected, Mrs. Dursley looked shocked and angry. After all, they normally pretend she didn't have a sister. No, she said sharply. Why? Funny stuff on the news, Mrs. Dursley mumbled. Owls? Shooting stars. There were a lot of funny looking people in the town today. So? Snapped Mrs. Dursley. Vernon. well, I just thought that maybe it was something to do with, well, you know, her crowd. Mrs. Dursley sipped her tea through pursed lips. Mr. Dursley wondered whether he dared tell her he heard the name Potter. He decided he didn't dare. Instead, he said as casually as he could, their son. He'd be about Dudley's age now, wouldn't he? I suppose so, said Miss Dursley stiffly. What's his name again? Howard, isn't it? Harry. Nastily. Common name, if you ask me. Oh, yes, 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 said Mr. Dursley, his heart sinking horribly. Yes, I quite agree. He didn't say another word on the subject as they went upstairs to bed, while Mrs. Dursley was in the bathroom. Mr. Dursley crept to the bedroom window and peered down into the front garden. The cat was still there. It was staring down Privet Drive as though if it were waiting for something. Was he imagining things? Could all this have been done to with the Potters? If it did, if it got out that they were related to a pair of well, he didn't think he could bear it. The Dursleys got into bed. Mrs. Dursley fell asleep quickly, but Mr. Dursley lay awake. Turning it all over in his mind, his last comforting thought before he fell asleep was that even if the Potters were involved, there was no reason for them to come near him and Mrs. Dursley. The Potters knew very well that he and Petunia thought about them and their kind. He couldn't see how he and Petunia could get mixed up in anything that might be going on. He yawned and turned over. It couldn't affect them. How very wrong he was. Mr. Dursley might have been drifting into an uneasy sleep, but the cat on the window outside was showing no sign of sleepiness. It was sitting as still as a statue, its eyes fixed unblinkingly as far corner of Privet Drive. It didn't so much as quiver when a car door slammed on the next street, nor when two owls swooped overhead, in fact. It was nearly midnight before the cat moved at all. A man appeared in the corner. The cat then, watching, appeared so suddenly and silently, you have thought he just popped out of the ground. The cat's tail twitched, and its eyes narrowed. All right, hold up, y'all. Wait. Ooh. I love doing stories like this because, like, I actually try to act it out. But hold up, wait. Okay, the eyes narrowed. Where is it? Okay, nothing like this man had ever been seen on Privet Drive. He was tall, thin, and very old. Judging by the silver of his hair and beard, which were both long enough to tuck into his belt, he was wearing long robes of a purple cloak that swept the ground and high-heeled buckled boots. His eyes were light, bright, and sparkling behind half-moon spectacles, and his nose was very long and crooked, as though it had been broken at least twice. This man's name was Albus Dumbledore. Albus Dumbledore didn't seem to realize that he had just arrived in a street where everything from his name to his boots was unwelcomed. Like us black people, he was busy rummaging in his cloak, looking for something. He had seemed to realize he was being watched because he looked up and suddenly at the cat, which was still staring at him from the other end of the street. For some reason, the sight of the cat seemed to amuse him. He chuckled and muttered, I should have known. I should have known. He found what he was looking for inside his pocket. It seemed to be a silver cigarette lighter. He flipped it open. Excuse me, you guys. Hold up, wait. I told you I was going to act this book out. Hold on. Oi! Oi! All right. Let's see. All right. Okay, from his inside pocket, it seemed to be a silver cigarette lighter. He flicked it open, held it up in the air, and clicked it, and the lights went dark. He clicked it again. The next lamp flickered into the darkness. 12 times he clicked the put outer until the only lights left on the whole street were two pinpricks in the distance, which were the eyes of the cat watching him. If anyone else looked out their window, now even beady-eyed Mrs. Dursley, they wouldn't be able to see anything that was happening down on the pavement. Dumbledore slipped the put-outer back into his cloak and set off down the street towards number 4, where he sat down on the wall next to the cat. He didn't look at it, but after a moment he spoke to it. Fancy seeing you here, Professor McGonagall. He turned to it. He turned to smile at the tabby, but it had gone. Instead, he was smiling at a rather severe-looking woman who was wearing square glasses exactly the shape of the markings that the cat had around its eyes. She, too, was wearing a cloak, an emerald one. Her black hair was drawn into the tight bun. She looked distinctly ruffled. How did you know it was me, sir? She asked. My dear professor, I've never seen such a cat sit so stiffly. If y'all liking this, let me know. If y'all liking this, let me know. I'm trying to entertain y'all, because I know I got a whole bunch of other people could be doing a whole bunch of other things. Y'all just let me know if y'all liking this. All right, we are on page 10. Chapter 1, page 10. Oh, God. All right. You'd be stiff if you'd been sitting on a brick wall all day. Hold up, wait, let me say it again. You'd be stiff if you'd been sitting on a brick wall all day, said Professor McGonagall. All day? When you could have been celebrating. I must have passed a dozen feasts and parties on my way here, Professor McGonagall sniffed angrily. You think they have been a bit more careful. But no, even the muggles have noticed something's going on. It was on their news. She jerked her head back at Dursley's dark living room. I heard it. Flocks of owls? Shooting stars? Well, they are not completely stupid, Albus. They were bound to notice something. Shooting stars down in Kent? I'll bet that was Deathless Diggle, he never had such a sense. You can't blame him. You can't blame them, said Dumbledore gently. We've had precious little time to celebrate for 11 years. I know that, said Professor McGonagall irritably. But that's no reason to lose our heads. People are downright careless. Out on the streets in broad daylight, not even dressed in muggle clothing, swapping rumors. She threw a sharp sideways glance at Dumbledore. Here, as though hoping he was going to tell her something, but he didn't. So she went on. A fine thing it would be if one of our own on the very day you know who seems to have disappeared at last. The muggles found out about all of us. I suppose he really has gone. Dumbledore? It certainly seems, said Dumbledore, we have much to be thankful for. Would you care for a lemon drop? A what? A lemon drop. They're kind of a muggle sweet I'm rather fond of. No, thank you, said Professor McGonagall coldly, as though she didn't think that this was a moment for lemon drops. As I say, even if you know who has gone, my dear Professor, surely a sensible person like yourself can call him by his name. All this you-know-who nonsense? For 11 years, I have been trying to persuade people to call him by his proper name, Voldemort. Professor McGonagall flinched, but Dumbledore, who was unsticking by 2 lemon drops, seemed not to notice. It's all gets so confusing if we keep saying you-know-who. I have never seen any reason to be frightened by saying Voldemort's name. I know I haven't, said Professor McGonagall, sounding half exasperated, half admiring. But you're different. Everyone knows you're the only one you know. Oh, all right, Voldemort was frightened of. You flatter me. You flatter me. Only because you too, well, noble to use them. It's lucky it's dark. I haven't blushed so much since Madame Pomfrey told me she liked my new earmuffs. Professor McGonagall shot a sharp look at Dumbledore and said, the owls are nothing like the rumors. They're flying around. You know what everyone's saying? What about his disappearance? What about what's finally stopped him? It seemed that Professor McGonagall had reached the point she was most anxious to discuss. The real reason she had been waiting on a cold, hard wall all day. For neither as a cat nor as a woman has she fixed Dumbledore with such a piercing stare as she did now. It was plain that whatever everyone was saying was not going to believe it until Dumbledore told her it was true. Dumbledore, however, was choosing another lemon drop and did not answer. What they're saying, she pressed. Hold up, let me say it right. What they're saying, she pressed, is that the last night Voldemort turned up in Godric's Hollow, he went to find the Potters. The rumor is that Lily and James Potter, or that they're dead. They're dead. Lily and James. I can't believe it. I don't want to believe it. Oh, Albus. Oh, Albus. Dumbledore reached out and patted her on the shoulder. I know, he said heavily. Professor McGonagall's voice trembled as she went on. That's not all. They're saying he tried to kill the Potter's son, Harry, but he couldn't. He couldn't kill the wee little boy. Not only one knows why or how, but they're saying that when he couldn't kill Harry Potter, Voldemort's power somehow broke. That's why he's gone. He's gone. Dumbledore, he's gone. Dumbledore nodded glumly. It's, it's, it's true, faltered Professor McGonagall. After all, he's done. All the people he's killed. He couldn't kill a little boy. It's just outstanding. All the things to stop him. But how in the name of heaven did Harry survive? We can only guess, said Dumbledore. We may never know. Professor McGonagall pulled out a handkerchief, dabbed it at her eyes, beneath her spectacles. Dumbledore gave a great sniff as he took a golden watch from his pocket and examined it. It was very odd, the watch. It had 12 hands, but no numbers. Instead, instead, little planets were moving around the edge. It must have made itself to Dumbledore. Though, because he put it back in his pocket, he said, Hagrid's late. I suppose it was time. He told you I'd be here, by the way? Yes, said Professor McGonagall. And I don't suppose you're going to tell me why you're here, of all places? I've come to bring Harry to his aunt and uncle. They're the only family he has left now. You don't mean, said Professor McGonagall, jumping to her feet and pointing at number 4. You can't. I've been watching them all day. You couldn't find 2 people who are less like us, and they've got this son? I saw him kicking his mother all the way up the street, screaming for sweets. Harry Potter, come here and live here. It has to be the best place for him. His aunt and uncle will be able to explain everything. When he's older, I've written them a letter. A letter? Repeated Professor McGonagall faintly, sitting back down on the wall. Really, Professor Dumbledore? Do you think you can explain all this in a letter? These people will never understand him. If today was known as Harry Potter Day in the future, there will always be a written book about Harry. Every child in our world would know his name. Exactly, said Dumbledore. It would be enough to turn any boy's head. Before he could walk and talk, famous for something he wasn't even remembering. Can you see how much better off he'll be growing up from all that until he's ready to take it? Professor McGonagall opened her mouth, changed her mind, swallowed, and then said, Sir, yes, you're right, but of course. But how's the boy getting here? How is the boy getting here? Dumbledore? She eyed his cloak, suddenly as though she thought he might be hiding Harry underneath it. Hagrid's bringing him. You think it's wise to trust Hagrid with something as important as this? I will trust Hagrid with my life, said Dumbledore. I'm not saying his heart isn't in the right place, said Professor McGonagall grudgingly. But you can pretend he's not callous. He tends to, well, what is that? What is that? A low rumbling sound had been broken the silence around them. It grew steadily louder, As they looked up and down the street for some sign of a headlight, it swelled. And at a moment's notice, a huge motorcycle fell out the air and landed on the road in front of them. Astride, he was almost twice as tall as a normal man, at least 5 times as wide. He looked simply too big to be allowed, and so wild. Long tangles of bushy black hair and beard hid most of his face. He had hands the size of trash can lids, and his feet in their leather boots looked like baby dolphins. In his vast muscular arms, he was holding a bundle of blankets. Hagrid, said Dumbledore, sounding relieved. At last. And where did you get that motorcycle? Borrowed it, Professor Dumbledore, sir, said the giant, climbing carefully off the motorcycle as he spoke. Young Sirius Black linked it to me. I got him, sir. No problems, were there? No, sir. Houses were almost destroyed, but I got him all out right before the moguls started swarming around. He fell asleep as we were flying over Bristol. Dumbledore and Professor McGonagall bent forward. Over the bundle of blankets, inside, just visible, was a baby, fast asleep underneath a tuft of jet black hair over his forehead. They could see a curiously shaped cut, like a lightning bolt. Is that where? Whispered Professor McGonagall. Yes, said Professor Dumbledore. He'll have that scar forever. Couldn't you do something about it? Dumbledore, even if I could, I wouldn't. Scars can come in handy. If I had one myself above my left knee, that's perfectly the map of London underground. Well, we'd better get this over with, shall we? Dumbledore took Harry in his arm and turned toward the Dursley house. Could I, could I say goodbye to him, sir? Asked Hagrid. He bent his great shaggy head over Harry and gave him what must have been a very scratchy, whiskery kiss. Then suddenly, Hagrid let out a howl, sounded like a wounded dog. Ooh! Shh! Hissed Professor McGonagall. You're going to wake the muggles? Sorry, sobbed Hagrid, taking a large spotted handkerchief and burying his face on it. But I, 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 I can't. I can't stand it. Lily James dead, and own poor little Potter, Harry, off to live with the Muggles. Yes, yes, it's all very sad. But get a grip on yourself, Hagrid, or we'll be found, said Professor McGonagall, patting Hagrid gingerly on the arm as Dumbledore stepped over on the low guard and walked to the front door. He laid Harry gently on the doorstep, took a letter out of his cloak, tucked it inside Harry's blankets, and then came back to the other two. For a full minute, the three of them stood and looked at the little bundle. Hagrid's shoulders shook. Professor McGonagall blinked furiously, and the twinkling light that usually shone from Dumbledore's eyes seemed to have gone out. Well, said Professor Dumbledore, finally, that's that. We've no business staying here. We may as well go and join the celebrations. Ah, said Hagrid in a very mobile voice. I'd best get this bike away. Good night, Professor McGonagall. And Sir Dumbledore, wiping his streaming eyes on his jacket sleeve, Hagrid swung onto the motorcycle and kicked the engine into life. With a roar, It rose into the air and off into the night. I shall see you soon, Professor McGonagall, said Dumbledore, nodding to her. Professor McGonagall blew her nose in reply. Dumbledore turned and walked back into the street. Onto the corner he stopped and took out the silver putter outer. Oh, where I put it. Oh, oh, wait. Good luck, Harry, he murmured, turned on his heel with the swish of his cloak. All light in him was gone. All right, everybody. That is the first 16 pages of Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a shower. I will be back, and we're going to get deep into this book. So without further ado, I bid you guys adieu.